Thank you a lot for joining me. We will start with a bit more general questions to put everything in the context, and then we will address the films that we have just seen. So my first question would be about the labeling or the concept of Middle Eastern cinema. Because as the Western audiences tend to understanding, they usually ignore the differences between different national cinemas that are like hiding behind this concept. And maybe especially for you, Adham, this question that usually it becomes a problematic or controversial label when you think about how these films are perceived at different film festivals and how they then get the money also from the producers, as they probably like try to think about them in like those stereotypical images, stories. So maybe you can address this issue.
Okay. I think the term Middle Eastern cinema is, I think, both interesting and controversial because, and I think this is a question that still political scientists and sociologists are still trying to answer. What is the Middle East? Does it include Iran, Turkey, Kurdistan? Does it include Israel? So it's a very political question, and still there are still a lot of discourse and discussion about it. And when it comes to cinema and art in general, to box different countries that speak different languages, and within the different languages, different dialects, and when it comes to the film industry, so you have a historical context in each country. So film industry in Egypt is way more different than the film industry in Palestine or in Iran or in any country. It depends on the historical development and the participation or the lack of the state, and how these countries were related to their former colonial powers, or the fact that they weren't occupied. So there are different factors that we should look at when we discuss the term Middle Eastern cinema. And also, is it Middle Eastern cinema and North African cinema? Is Egypt per se, is it part of North Africa or the Middle East? Is it part of Africa? Is it an Arab country? So there's a lot of questions that I think I don't have an answer to them. I don't claim to have a definition, but I think we should put it on the table to a discussion that how we box different countries, or how we limit the experiences of different countries into one term. I think, again, might not be an expert on this, but the term Eastern European cinema. What is Eastern European cinema? Is it Romanian cinema? Is it Hungarian cinema? Is Slovenia part of Eastern Europe? And again, the limitations that you put when you box different experiences and different film industries into one label. The consequences of this, because this term is also, it's used in academia, it's used in journalism, it's used in the catalogs of film festivals. So I think when you take to the level of the organizations and the funding of organizations, that is it part of the whether it is part of governments or film festivals, these limitations or that you have to box a certain film as a Middle East coming from the Middle East, then it puts restraints on the filmmakers, that they have a checklist of several themes that if you were a filmmaker and you pitch to the funder, then they would be accepted, that you would get the fund. So in the Middle East, again, I am using the term, that there are also a lot of discussions about whether we invite the state or whether we invite the government to participate to support and finance the film industry. But at the same time, we fear that this might cause censorship. But if you reverse it that way, that if you go to other entities and ask for their own financial support, you're also getting some kind of a censorship to the filmmakers' aspirations to make their own ideas. So they have to either censor some of their own ideas, or they have to dilute it in order to fit the criteria of the funders.
Yeah, maybe I wanted to address actually the same question too, but from your experience. So how did this label, I mean, maybe boxed or influenced your production finding founds, promotion, festival, circulation?
Yeah. I mean, what you say about how problematic it is to box different countries, different films, and just give a label. From an artistic view, I totally agree. I 100% agree. And I would say this is always a problem with labeling something and bringing things together, put a label on it and say, well, that's Middle Eastern cinema, or just another term. But I like to play devil's advocate at this point, because I think there is also a positive side about it. And for example, I make it very practical and talk about our film Manivelle at this point. The main funder of this project is the Robert Bosch Foundation. And just to say it in a very general way, the idea of the Robert Bosch Foundation is to fund and to support intercultural exchange. So I think this general idea is something we can agree on, and this is something which I think is a great idea, and I think it's great that there is a company funding a foundation, and so on and so on and so on. And so, of course, there are decision makers. Of course, there's a jury. Of course, there is something behind it, like a catalog, where they say, okay, check, 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 check. However, and in our case, there was a funding program called the Robert Bosch Film Prize for Arab cinema, for the Arab world. And I always had a problem with this wording, like Arab world. Yeah, what does it mean? Who do you include? Who do you exclude? And so on. But in terms of how can we make this film and how can we really work in an intercultural way, which was our idea as well, it was a 100% match with the Robert Bosch Foundation. And so it was for us a question of, okay, how do we deal with it? And is the label Arab world or Arab cinema such a big problem for us? And the honest answer at this point was no, definitely not, because we can agree with the basic idea behind it. And I, as a producer, understand that there is a jury or that there are decision makers who have to base their decision on something. And of course it should be the script, of course it should be the artistic idea behind it. And I think it is, the main decision is based on that. But of course, these are people who have to make so many decisions, and you have to pitch it, you have to pitch the script, you have to package everything, you have to say, okay, here we are. And of course, you make labels to make the jury understand what you are doing. And one of those labels is Middle Eastern cinema or Arab cinema. And I understand the general problem with labeling and putting things into boxes, but in a practical way, this helped a lot.
Okay, thank you a lot for these interesting points of views. But now maybe let's approach the question of genre film in the context of Middle Eastern cinema, because it is like a general idea that genre film isn't quite that developed throughout history. with big exceptions of Egyptian and Turkish cinema. So maybe first the question for you, Adham, what do you think about that? How do you understand it? And maybe then you can also develop some thoughts about Egyptian genre film.
I think if we want to answer this question, we might take a step or sort of reverse the question of how we first define genre film, because the main definition, or not the main definition, but the mainstream definition is horror film, thriller, sci-fi, or psychodramas, or that's like at least the mainstream. But if you take this definition and apply it to certain cinemas, for example, in Lebanon or in Turkey or in Egypt, you will find films that have created their own genres, but without necessarily falling into these categorizations. So, for example, from a perspective of Egyptian cinema, there have been, I think, a film in the 1940s, a depiction or adaptation of Faust, and how mankind, or how a person sold his soul to a devil, to the devil. At that time, people, I think, thought it was a bit of a comedy because it had a lot of theatrical approach. But you see themes of horror films developing from the 40s till at least the 60s. Again, the relationship between human beings and Satan, and I think the same theme developed also in the 70s and the 80s, and there are very famous films about exorcism and how some people are possessed by the devil, and how what's the progress to undo this. So, and there are several genre films, like there's an Egyptian filmmaker called Kamal Sheikh, and so many people describe him as the Egyptian Hitchcock, because throughout the 50s and the 60s he made a lot of psychodramas that at that time rarely people do put it in the under description of psychodrama. But if you have a fuller context of his films and his filmography, and then if you want to start this categorization, you will find that there has been genre films that had developed in Egyptian cinema. And another thing that you can find also in Syrian and some Lebanese cinema is espionage, because of the Arab-Israeli conflict. So dozens of films and TV series have developed about this topic, and so on and so on. So I think if you reverse the question and diversify and open up the term genre film and apply it to different cinemas, Arab cinemas and Middle Eastern cinemas. So again, we go to the to this term. You will find that there are genre films that have developed.
Okay, and now maybe let's plunge into the contemporary cinema, which has in the past few years we have seen some great films, as the Iranian indie hit Girl Walks Alone Home at Night as the first big splash. And maybe you can just comment on what's going on now.
I think there are several ideas in several films that I think since 2014, several films have been reaching out to film festivals, which is actually great that filmmakers are trying to break the taboo that, again, a Middle Eastern film or an Arabic film just focus on politics or female emancipation, which is also a great topic to focus on. But of course, your film or the film that we just watched. So I think there has been attempts to break away from the stereotypical representations of Middle Eastern cinema, and to put it in either a horror or a thriller or a sci-fi approach that allows filmmakers to discuss their own ideas, discuss their own agenda, but in a different context. And now I think with the rise of subculture and with the rise of that young people, they're now are able to organize their own film festivals, to have short film festivals or student film festivals, or even festivals that feature mobile films that have been made by a mobile. So there is a diversity in how artists and filmmakers can create their own projects. So I think there is a good prospect in that area.
Okay, so and your film Manivelle is a great example of that. So maybe you can tell us how did everything start? How did you find the story, and how did it develop?
So I think the first contact with Manivelle was in Jordan. I was invited by Robert Bosch Foundation to a so-called film market where they bring together young German producers and directors from the Arab world. There again, we have these terms. I've been to Jordan there, and then there was this guy sitting under palm trees and talking about robot in Lebanon, and he was pitching this story, and he pitched it to me as Manivelle really existed, and I was like, what? Wait, again. And of course it was just made up, but Fadi is originally comes from the comic world, and he draws comics and publishes comics, and this was something I was really interested in this combination of genre and also political movies somehow, but in a very entertaining way. So I found it super interesting, and I just like this guy fits, and just right away from the spot we Skyped with Bernadette from Jordan, because Bernadette and I, we worked together, and we had a company in Berlin, Visual Stories, and so I pitched the story to Bernadette and said, well, I met this guy here, and I think we should work together. What do you think about this idea?
Yeah, and for me it was really a strange, unknown world, I have to confess. I had no idea about Lebanese history. I was really interested in this kind of intercultural exchange because we both come from film academy, so we studied at the German Film Academy, and we produced, I think, 8 films together before. And we have to say, I mean, we worked with a large variety of directors, but talking about genre cinema, I don't know what is the case here, but if you attend Film Academy, like the classic stories you start with is the relationship to describe the relationship of a couple who is about to break up and very much like circling around themselves and then turning into speechlessness, and then there is a great song in the end, in best case, and then that's the stories you tell like through these years. And so when we were approached with a genre film, which like opens this magic box of cinema, you know, and like refers to a lot of things that have been made. And I think this is so fascinating because I think it's a very Lebanese film, but at the same time, it's a quite universal film, I feel, or you can see it from the reactions that you get from audiences who also doesn't necessarily need to know anything about Lebanon, but still can connect or relate. And like, I think it's so fascinating that this grammar of, I don't know, the way how hero stories function, how we relate to our glorious past and all these things. I mean, this goes for so many countries and cultures. And so this was like my entry point, and I thought, well, it's actually a very elegant way to discover the history and the cultural background of a country, and at the same time making use of all the tools you have as a storyteller and filmmaker to make this an adventurous story. And I think also, like, talking about checkboxes and so, I think we were really lucky with having generous, like, funders, and I never had the feeling that, oh, we have to be aware that we hit this checkbox, or that, like, we don't dare to tell history in a wrong way or whatever. So this is the freedom that you get if you really, like, rely on your original vision as a filmmaker. And I think this is something that Fadi is really strong in. And I mean, of course, you struggle with a lot of things, and Fitz was also, like, affected by censorship as a comic artist, and we wouldn't have gotten the shooting permissions. For example, if you remember the scene in front of the presidential palace where, like, the guard is saying, no, what are you doing here? I mean, we couldn't say what we really intend to shoot. So you have to find your creative ways around it, but still it's possible. And I think also, like, just last week we got approached by the Kinemathek in Beirut, so they also want to have the film for the archive. And so it's like, it's not that it's a strange thing within Lebanon and only we here enjoy it to have this kind of vision. It finds its place, I think. Yeah.
And now maybe some questions from the audience. I think you all have a lot of them. No? Okay. Maybe the robot Manivelle. So how is he made? Because he's actually a puppet, and it has an interesting story. So maybe you could tell us that. And the audience, in the meantime, can think of a question.
Don't be shy. So the robot, how it was made. So we told you how Fadi pitched the idea to us. So, and we decided to work together, but at this point, it wasn't clear how we can bring it to the big screen. And our first initial idea was, well, maybe we have to do something with CGI. Let's find the right team and do some tests. And we were really into that, actually. We had a team of animators and do the 3D rigging and all this stuff. And but this is very important, we just started as an open process and as a test, because it was clear with a small budget and as independent producers, it could turn out that we have to take another turn. And exactly this happened. I mean, the CGI looked pretty cool, and just for the first viewer, it was like, wow, they built a robot, and it's on a 3D table, and so on. But for us and for Fadi, it was very clear that we have to sell the idea that this really happened. This was crucial for the whole project. And as you know, with CGI, when it's not made perfectly well, there is something, I would say, I can feel it just in the guts, that there's something wrong there. And this is what happened with our CGI tests. So we started from zero again, and it was clear that this will be more of a practical approach, that we're gonna build Manivelle, but how do you build a 2-meter tall robot and let him walk through Beirut? So this was the question we had to answer as producers at this point, and we met a guy, Chris Kunzmann, or Chris Creatures is his name, and he has a wonderful studio in Berlin where he builds puppets and creatures, and for films, for theme parks, for everything you can imagine. And we knocked on his door, and he opened his studio, and you could see zombies hanging from the roof, and big gorillas and dinosaurs and everything. And we said, okay, this is the guy. He's the guy who's going to build Manivelle. And after some pitching and some convincing, he was on board. And so what he did is he has built a big 2-meter tall suit, and an actor was in the suit, and these are all the scenes in the film where you see Manivelle in Beirut today. And then it was clear that we have this archival footage and that we're going to combine archival footage and real footage. And for this purpose, Chris has made a Manivelle puppet from the table of this size. And we found puppet players who played this Manivelle puppet in front of a green screen, so we could combine Manivelle, this Manivelle puppet, with the archival footage to create the illusion of Manivelle taking place at all these, or being at all these historical events in Lebanon. So this was the way how it was realized.
Now maybe some questions from the audience? Yes, up there. Do we have a microphone to travel? No. Okay, so.
I can scream. My question was, you needed a second puppet, actually, just to make it more simple for shooting in front of a green screen, or you couldn't make it anyway with the first one?
Well, we have like Manivelle in different age stages, so to say. And like the young Manivelle, with 2 arms and everything, this is the puppet. And we were also quite clear that this young Manivelle, in best shape and as the entertaining star, needs to be capable of other things compared to this rotten old man that can hardly walk anymore. And so this was the main reason, actually. And then also, I mean, kind of when we first walked into this workshop of Chris Creatures, we were really so fascinated about these old school analog techniques of film animation, so to say. And then also we somehow decided together with Fadi we want to have it all. And Chris was then like, you want to have a 2-meter tall robot suite? And we said, yes, definitely. And I said, and look, I have these puppets here. We could also do a younger Manivelle version as a puppet. And we said, wow, I mean, we have never worked with puppet players. I don't know who of you has or has watched these kind of performances. And this is also like quite an old craft. And then we figured out that there is still a school in Berlin that educates these puppet masters, which are also brilliant people. I mean, 5 of them operated with this Manivelle puppet because one is responsible for one leg and things you learn. So it was really, yeah, it was a fascinating process. And I think a lot of like the wanna believe moments in this film also come out of this process, and that you see, okay, you can make it happen. And as I said, there is this toolbox, and then you also like you reenact things you have seen before. I mean, Fitz is a big fan of these trash American action movies, and then he did his own analysis of like the worst scenes out of this, and he said, look, this is the way how artificial they move the fist when they are in fight. We do it exactly the same way. And then you just, you start playing, basically.
Great, some more questions? Oh, yeah, great. We have 2.
I just wondered about the budget, because obviously you were going to use CGI, and then ultimately you didn't. You used the analog techniques. How much do you think that impacted on the budget, in terms of decreasing the budget? Was it a substantial amount?
Hard to say, I would say, because it was a so different approach, and to be completely open, of course we had our financing in place and we had budgeting and our script, but it was a journey. We started there. It wasn't 100% clear that the outcome will look like in the beginning. It was clear that we are going to have this journey together with Fitz, and that we are all agreed that we're gonna make this film and find solutions for this, but there wasn't a number like, this is the budget for CGI and this is the budget for building the robot. And I think in the end we were pretty lucky, because if we would have gone for the CGI version, every new shot, every new idea would have impact on the budget, and big impact. The suit, the big robot suit and the puppet gave us freedom in the end to play around and to develop new ideas. And for example, when we were in Beirut, Fadi came up with the idea to shoot in front of the statue, where you see it with those fingers. This is something, well, at this point we could say, well, okay, we have to transport the suit, we have to ask the actor to stay a little bit longer. Well, okay, let's do it. But compare it to a CGI shoot. So this would have meant to have a lot of planning before we could have realized that. And yeah, I think in the end it saved us money to do it this way. But what is much more important, it gave us the freedom to tell the story we wanted to tell. And it gave Fadi the freedom to fiddle around a bit and come up with new ideas while we were shooting. And I think we can, as producers, this is something where we say, this is a great idea to play around and take parts, bring them into the film, to get this inspiration from the shooting itself and let the process be part of the film in the end. And I think for the outcome of the film, this was really the right decision, and yeah, bring some magic to it.
But then also you have to keep in mind that, I mean, this is a short film production, and we were lucky to be funded by the institutions we were funded, and it's a kind of miracle. I mean, most of the money comes from Germany, so that they supported a project like this, because basically it's a Lebanese film. And then, like, you try to make the best out of the means given, but this also means from the get-go, you always have to kind of negotiate package deals. You know, you have to find like committed artists, collaborators that are fascinated to bring this idea to life. And then you say, okay, we will have this amount of money, but you can't count the hours anymore. I mean, this is also like a sad truth, but this is it. And I mean, same goes for the CGI artists as well as the robot costume builder. But I mean, I think it took him half a year to build that, to rehearse it, to optimize it. And then also, like, just this morning I was thinking, I mean, we did so much planning for this film, and we had a very detailed storyboard and a very elaborated version of the script, actually 1,000 versions of the script. And then in the end, if you compare the script to what you see on screen, you figure out that a lot of layers have never been written in this script. So also, like, we had to keep so flexible in the process. And if we would have been working with a team of CGI artists, they would have thought we are the least professional producers and directors they have ever worked with, because basically every briefing we once gave, like, say 2 months later, wasn't really up to date anymore because of better ideas. And I think, like, this kind of also playful approach, making the best of, like, the opportunities you see, and try to really bring this material mix to life. And I think this was something that was always super important for Fadi, because when I read the first script versions, they were only based on archival material, you have to imagine. No live shooting at all, no contemporary layer. This wasn't in it. It was just like working with archival material and then bringing the robot in. And then we figured out that we have to do a lot in parallel. So, like, while the archival material research was going on, we were already shooting. And then if you work with CGI, you have to be perfect in matchmaking. So there is no, the archival material could be roughly this or that. You have to have like the exact frame and everything. And and we were always in the situation that, okay, we still need a little bit of leeway. It could also be the other way around. There might be an additional time layer that we open. And I think for this kind of flexibility, and I mean, we are super happy with the outcome. We don't want the film to look any different or say, haven't we better stick to the original idea? Not at all. But, you know, it's like, having this freedom of moving around or not.
Yeah, I mean, I really love the scenes when Manivelle goes out on the street and the reaction of people who see them. For me, it's the magic of the film happens there in those gazes. But we had another question from the audience back up there, I think.
How hard was it to find the right actor to play the robot, or was it even that important?
I think I have. The actor was my neighbor and good friend of mine, and it was clear that we need somebody in there who's really tall and really strong. And the actor, Yannick, is 2 meters tall, a basketball player and sports student at this point, and a big comic book fan. And this was really the hook. When I told him the story, I haven't told him before that I'm gonna ask him, do you want to play Manivelle? I just told him the story. And at this point, he was like, okay, I have to help you. I have to do something in it. And then I asked him, how about the main role, main cast? And, this was a pretty clear decision at that standpoint. I think, we are the transparent producers today. I think we can tell that Fadi wasn't convinced right from the beginning, because he wanted to have a bigger casting at this point, and I think we bounced some ideas back and forth at that point, and because you have to imagine, when you're a director, you come up with this idea and this whole process starts rolling, and of course there are some limitations. And we as independent producers at this point had to say, wow, we don't have the money to pay famous actors, and there will be some limitations. And Fadi always said, of course, I totally understand that, but I need some options at this point. Well, and then we said, well, come over and meet Yannick. Yannick lived in Berlin at this point, and Fadi in Lebanon. And when they first met, or was it online? I don't remember. When they first met, it immediately clicked. And from that point on, Yannick had to be the actor in the suit.
And I want to add, I mean, this is not a classical main character, no? So we build it from many elements, again, because the voice comes from another actor. Like, it's Arabic. Yannick doesn't understand a word of Arabic. You have the physical appearance, you have the different layers, you have a very strong sound design, which gives a lot of character. So I think you have to add all these ingredients, and then it's like a kind of combined understanding of who this character is actually, or like in which way the movements work out for the robot. This was also something that we only found out by experimenting, because you build this suit in parts and then you see like how fluent a movement can be. And of course, I mean, it's a lot influenced by the physical capacity of this very person who is inside the costume. But still, I mean, this suit gives so many limitations. And even if Yannick is a perfectly trained sportsman, so to say, he was really suffering, because this stuff is quite heavy, as heavy as it might look. And it was hot in Beirut. And, you know, you have to carry this thing. I mean, shooting days normally don't last for 3 hours, but for 10 and more. So it's really special, like the way then this character evolves from this combination of movements, voice, sound design, the incapability of doing something that this character needs to do in this very situation, even the anger or things like that. I mean, of course, you can feel like the actor inside, but then, yeah, the material also like limits or allows for certain characteristics. And this was also really interesting to discover with this kind of main actor character, how you call it, yeah.
Maybe any other questions from the audience?
I have a question. I just wanted to ask, because you said earlier that you started the film after the Arab Spring, and or at least the idea sometime during the Arab Spring. And I think if you watch the film today, you will get a grasp of more or less what's happening or what has happened in Lebanon. So I just wanted to, and rarely do films that capture a political angle, or just, you know, the film was made in 2017, but yet it's still relevant till today. I just wanted to know, how do you feel about this, that it's still, the film still resonates what's happening in Lebanon?
I mean, this endless story of ups and downs and downs and downs. I think this was exactly like written by Fadi in the exposé of the idea for this film. And then, of course, you always tend to believe that times will get better, or that you have the sense, especially right after Arab Spring, that there could be a change now. And like when we were in Beirut, the city was so different than it is today. I mean, even like in very practical terms, the accommodation where our film team was, it doesn't exist anymore. This like part of the city was totally affected by the explosion. And like then you try again to bring together these puzzle pieces and say, okay, this is what we already have in the film, this very sentiment of like a down again. But then also you don't want to lose the hope that like there are forces that could bring together the good past or the better future or whatever. So it's kind of like history repeating in a, I would say, not so good sense. And even like our colleagues in Lebanon, when we talked to them, it's not the best time for creatives right now. I mean, it's even compared to 5 years ago when we did this together, it's getting more and more difficult. So yeah, it's strange, kind of.
Yeah, I don't really know how to answer the question because yeah, to watch the film here and see it the way here on the big screen. I mean, we are still so involved in this project, and we have made friends in Lebanon, and we are not in an exchange on a daily basis. But of course, we get to know what's happening over there and all this, yeah. This whole political mess, I think we can say that. And when you see this film, which is a big part of it, it's fiction, and on the other hand, there's so much reality in it and so much influence from how Fadi grew up in Lebanon and what influenced him. And so I would say, yes, it's still I think you can't tell if the film was made in 2017 or in 2020 or 22 or whatever. But if you compare the situation, how we as the filmmakers see this film today, I think it's a bit different, because we've been to Beirut at this time, and we have a clear image of Beirut and the life in Beirut at this time over there, and this has to do with our personal experience. And I haven't been to Beirut after the explosion, and I just hear from our friends and I read in the newspaper. And of course, there is some kind of picture in my head at this point, which is kind of dark. And I think to really answer your question, I need to go back to Beirut. So this is a question which is not only connected to the film you just saw on the screen, but also to personal experience and to with exchange with people over there. Yeah. Not sure if I answered right. Yeah.
So now we are kind of approaching the end of, not the time, but the time we are running short of time. But anyhow, maybe my last question would be kind of what is the future of Arab genre film? Maybe Adham, you can say something on that, and maybe then you too, from your experience, what do you see in the future?
I think we can be optimistic in terms of, again, the availability and the new creations of smaller scale local festivals and the abundance of subcultures, interest in comic books, interest in sci-fi, young people organizing smaller events. I mean, in the Cairo Film Festival for the last 3 years, there has been a midnight festival that features genre films, but mainly from Asia, because that's where is an abundance of horror and thriller and sci-fi. So I think there is hope that younger people can go and pitch their ideas and engage more. And also, I'm personally interested because, if you go from the films the genre films from 2016 till 2019, or at least 2020, you see that most of them are from the directors and the filmmakers are from the generation of, Star Wars, Scream, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But I'm interested to see how the 90s generation, the millennials, are, who have seen the Arab Spring, who have seen the revolutions and the counter-revolutions, the economic crisis, the terrorism, the rise of radical groups everywhere. I would be interested on a personal level to see how they, interact and, pitch their art and ideas and aspirations and fears into these different genres.
I mean, I'm optimistic. I think, first of all, we are here at the perfect spot, and as long as these committed festival makers exist, we all have a lot ahead to discover, because I think these are such rich cultures with such a variety of original stories, and for us it's a huge privilege to dive into these different universes of stories. I think we can only benefit and learn as an audience. And on the producer side, again, I also think these kind of funding programs that are cross-border funding, so not only the Arab Fund for Arts and Culture and the European Media Program, but really encouraging people to exchange. And this is exactly what happened with this Robert Bosch Foundation program. Of course, I mean, if they enable German producers to spread out and say, okay, look, we invite you to Jordan, we make this first step, and then as soon as you start on a personal level to make connections, I mean, then the adventure starts. And I think there are so many combinations of people that could be great creative collaborators that don't know of each other yet. But I think as soon as festivals or funders create this kind of meeting points, a lot of stories are to come. And so I definitely, I think it's one of my best experiences as a producer. I learned so much on so many levels, and this is why we are doing it. I think to learn and to find out new things about the world. Yeah.
So yeah, thank you a lot for staying here. So if you have any questions left, you can meet us in the lobby or just at the festival. And before I let you go, I would just like to draw your attention on the new issue of Ekran, where you can find a lot of texts about the retrospective film Soleil. Enjoy the festival, the reading, and just one last hint: if you want to see more of the beautiful yellow Chevrolet, I invite you to the Road of Salina, which will be playing on Sunday, Masha. Yeah.